YouTube, welcome back to the Allegheny Northern in N-scale, and today we are going to talk about some of the fastest ways that you can ruin the mood. And no, not like that. I'm not here to help you with that particular mood. I'm here to help you with the mood on your layout. So I obviously watch a lot of YouTube videos. I watch folks that are at my level of modeling, above my level at modeling, but particularly I like to watch folks who are below my level of modeling because it lets me see where people are struggling and where I look at something and go, ooh, we need to do a video on covering something. And this is something that is kind of near and dear to my heart because we spend so much time on this channel talking about details, and we talk about them in relation to like our locomotives and our rolling stock, but we don't talk about our scenery and our layouts. And we can have the most realistic looking locomotive, we can have everything error specific, we can spend hours and hours of time making sure that our tracks go in the exact same pattern that they did in the real life. And then when it comes to scenery, and all that hard work goes to waste because we have scenery that is subpar. So we've spent all this time doing this research. We've spent all this time building the perfect train, detailing it out, getting it all just perfect, only to be ruined by a bad setting. And it just so happens that I have a ton of bad settings on my layout. Most of these settings happen because I am spanning over a decade on this layout. So some of these sections are more than 10 years old. And in 10 years, there's an amazing amount of advancement, either in scenery material or just in my own skill. So those areas need reworked. And some of those areas are areas where I tried a technique that kind of worked, but I've since come up with something better. So they need updated. The rest of the conditions that I have are either unfinished scenes because, well, the layout's not finished, or they are I'm going to call it the casualty of the expansion. So scenes got removed, scenes got cut in half, scenes got relocated, so the scenery isn't tied together, and we have big gaps in that scenery. So in those cases, and when we're backfilling, we need to make sure that we avoid some of these common pitfalls that are going to just take away from what you're trying to accomplish. And in this particular scene, we have several of these bad examples, or good examples of bad things, I guess, that just absolutely ruin a scene. And so let's talk first about what we got going on here on the hillside. So I'm going to just zoom you in here a little bit. Okay, I don't know if they put this ballast in with a shotgun or what, but look at what the maintenance away crew did here. We have ballast shotgunned up the hillside, and it's just messy. I know it's a, class 2 railroad, but yeah, I think they do a little bit better job. So this takes away from the whole realism of the layout. Now, in some cases, it can be brushed off because it's just loose, but in this case, it's kind of into the scenery. So what I'll do is I'll scrape off what I can here, and then I will basically go over it with new scenery. Okay, so if you're into the layout as far as you're into the detailing phase and kind of finalizing everything, and you've got a condition that looks like this, absolutely fix it. Do not leave it like that because it's going to immediately look like sloppy scenery work. Okay, let's stay in the same shot and let's move down here. Unfinished rails. Okay, so in the background we have rails that have been painted, and in the foreground we have rails that are not. And that will immediately draw attention, and not the good kind of attention that you want on your layout. It'll draw bad attention because you have these very shiny rails. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with these Woodland Scenics paint pens, and really anyone. And you can shake these and get them started and get the ink paint flowing through them. And as long as what I try to do is, this is such a boring task for me. It's really annoying, but it's a necessity when you're dealing with Unitrack because it looks bad when you spray paint or airbrush Unitrack, in my opinion. But if you just take this and you come in here and you darken up your rails, so you can see front rail, back rail. Yeah, that looks a lot better. And this will go a long way in taking the fake toy-like quality out of your model. And it does it pretty quickly. So if you've got miles and miles of track, this is a tedious process. If you are just working section by section, it's not so bad. And you can sort of just, you know, do it as you go. But this is one of those things that I put in when I'm doing my quote-unquote boring scenery, because once the basic scenery is in and you get this sort of painted in here, you can kind of see where things are going to look and how they're going to go. You will get paint all over your rails, and you might, depending on how big of a section you're working, you might be able to get it off before it dries. But I found sometimes when I do that, I actually take the paint off the side of the rails, and it's actually better to just wait. And I know that's contrary to just what everybody else does on the internet, but you know what? I was never one for doing what everybody else does. So you can do it you can go your own way, so to speak, on that. And if you want to let it dry and then take it off, that's fine. If you want to try to take it off while it's still wet, do what you got to do. But in any event, you should get your rails painted. They make two colors. They make a rust and they make a steel rail color. I use the rust for my less traveled rails, and I use my rail color for my main lines. You can actually use a combination of the two of them together, which looks pretty good. So in any event, make sure you get your rails painted. Okay, let's stay in the same area. It's just lovely that I have so many goofs in this one area. And it's a combination of goofs and just unfinishedness in the scene. But right here, we've got this really rocky terrain, and I kind of did that on purpose just because of the scenery that's going to be here. It didn't need to be perfect, but it also reveals where there is some bare plaster showing. Bare plaster on a scene ruins it immediately. So if you've got a hillside or a scenery and you've got plaster stuck, or that was loose, so that was lucky, but you've got scenery material stuck where it's not supposed to be, immediately takes away all of the realism of your scene. Okay, just absolutely destroys it. So make sure you clean. Okay, the next thing that will draw away from a scene is crowding. Okay, and we do this all the time. I've actually mentioned this on some other videos where I've said I got too much stuff. Okay, so what do I mean by too much stuff? Well, here we have a crushed stone loadout. Okay, so we're working on a quarry. But look at all of the cars that are in this quarry. And let me just pull you back here so you can see it. Even if I'm switching this industry, I've got two complete tracks full of cars to receive stone. But what you'll notice is I'm at the end of my line here. That's the end. That is literally the end of the layout. There is no more layout after that. And I've only got half the train through the crusher. So I've got more cars here than this industry can handle, and I've got a slew of cars that are never going to get loaded. Okay, so why are these cars here? Well, quite frankly, because I had nowhere to put them. But what this does is it takes away from the scene, because I've got this crowded industry that is not workable. There's too many cars here. And so what needs to happen is the train length needs to be shortened, and the rest of this stuff needs to be taken out and put into like a storage track somewhere, or into a yard, or into a train, but it needs to get out of here. It's just upset. Okay, so that looks a lot more realistic. I now have a manageable amount of cars in my industry. Absolutely looks better. And we're going to go ahead and call that done. I'm going to take those other cars, move them off. But lo and behold, look at that. Another example. Plaster. I have no idea where this even came from. It probably came from up above when I was working on the port scene right above it. And so this is all going to need chipped out and replaced, because you can't fix it. You can't, like, I guess you could paint it maybe, but trust me. Okay, this is probably a pet peeve more than it is necessarily something that's going to ruin a scene, but these tank cars, they're just sitting here. They're sitting here mainly because I got nowhere else to put them. They're not in an actual train. And the problem with them is because they're sitting here, there's no industry around that takes these tank cars. So if you were somebody looking at the layout and you knew anything about trains, you'd look at it and go, well, where are these guys going? And why are they stored on the branch line to the industry? Yeah, they shouldn't be here. So keep an eyeball on where you're keeping your stuff. And if you don't have enough yard space for all the trains that you have, which is a real problem, then you need to look at taking stuff off the layout to avoid that clutter. And so, okay, so now I've got all these cars sitting back here. I've got the ballast cars that are not in a train, and I've got these hoppers that are actually for an industry here, but they're all, like, everything's connected together. And once again, we've created a traffic jam that I can't get to the cars that I need to. So if I was trying to switch out the gravel industry, I've got tanker cars and hopper cars on the way. It's just a mess. Okay, it's not prototypical. So from an operation standpoint, you want to clean that. Broken details. They are hounding my layout right now. And it is because I'm doing work basically above a lot of these scenes, and I just bump things, and you're going to bump things as well. And so if you have a scene that's a little bit more complete, try to protect it so you don't get scenery material on it, first of all. But then before you move, make sure, move on, make sure you didn't damage anything, and if you did, put it back together. And this one actually looks like it's going to need a little bit more attention because I don't think it's going to stay. But this is, it'll immediately kill a scene, and it'll stick out as a sore thumb in your videos or in your view, especially if you've got guests over and they see that your front loader is in two parts. It immediately kills the mood, kills the scene, just makes it look like either one, you didn't care, or two, you just didn't have the patience to go back and fix it. Yeah, we're going to have to go take this over to the workbench, but get the details fixed. Figures laying on their side, trucks knocked over, pieces knocked off, bad look, get them fixed. Okay, next is we spend a lot of time focusing on our scenery, on our buildings, on our trains. Do we forget about our vehicles? They're part of the scenery, right? And, well, if we have a Trainworks, double FedEx truck here, very realistic, very well detailed, and we stick it next to whatever this is, boy, do we just kill the scene. Like, okay, I understand that this truck here is probably, it's $150 maybe. What are they, like 30 a trailer, so 60 and 40. Okay, you're just on, probably over $100, right, with tax, right? All right, but, all right, that thing's, maybe $10-15 in a set with 3 other vehicles that are of equal quality. So we need to get this bus out of here. It doesn't look like it fits the rest of the scene anyway, and it just looks bad. It looks clunky. It's probably out of scale, honestly. It's just not gonna work for what we're trying to accomplish here. So we need to replace that with a bus that is a little bit more in scale. And this is just some scenery material that's dropped down, some dust and stuff. It just needs vacuumed up. Make sure you vacuum your layout from time to time, especially if you're in an area where you get a lot of dust. I'm very fortunate that, for the most part, most of the dust that I create down here is from scenery, and so it's very easily vacuumed up. But if you're somewhere that you don't have a good HVAC system, or you don't have a good filter on your HVAC system, and you're blowing dust and dirt everywhere all year round, vacuuming is a lot more important, especially keeping that stuff out of your locomotive. So, side note there on keeping your layout clean. But anyway, make sure your scale details travel all the way through into your vehicles and your people. Okay, once you have your vehicle scale fidelity down, the next thing we got to talk about is the placement of your vehicles. And I see this all the time. And I get it, I'm a little bit more sensitive to this because obviously I'm in construction. So when I see somebody set up a construction scene and they've got various pieces of equipment modeled that are doing something that isn't really prototypical, it drives me insane. So if you have a construction scene or an industrial scene, it's not just enough to drop a bulldozer in the scene or to drop a dump truck in the scene. You have to kind of know what the scene is that you're setting up and know what kind of equipment would be involved in that. Now, this is not just about construction equipment, it's about everything from your maintenance of way to your just your general city scenes, okay? You need to understand that if you're not in a logging community, the likelihood of you seeing a logging truck on your roads very low, okay? Depending on the logging truck type. So kind of think of where you're at, right? If you're modeling a Union Pacific in in a desert scenery where there's very little trees, a logging truck doesn't really fit. If you're modeling somewhere near the mountain edge where there could be some logging trucks coming out, okay, well that might make a little more sense, right? And then you can always do the, well, it's just passing through trying to, okay. We all know there are certain areas where we see logging trucks and there's certain areas we don't see logging trucks. All right? That's what I'm getting at. This scene here is a paving scene that a lot of you folks comment on, but it is a very logical scene. Everything that's here is something that you are going to see in a real paving situation, right? So we've got our paver. We have our guy standing next to the paver directing the dump truck. We have our guy who's in the back. He's climbing up onto the paver. We have a shovel man back here patching in a hole. We've got our two compactors. We have our breakdown and our finish compactor. And then, of course, we have our street sweeper keeping the edge clean, getting ready for the next pass of asphalt, right? And then, of course, we have my favorite role, the project manager here, maybe a superintendent, on the phone, probably talking to the boss because I'm guessing somebody screwed something up. They either didn't get the right number of tonnage or the crew's not, something going on. There's always a problem. But we also have the support equipment, right? We've got skid steer. You'll probably never see a paving crew without a skid steer or some kind of a small front loader on a tractor. Of course, we've got the crew vehicle, right? There's another, right there. You got two guys talking, probably trying to figure out, the next game plan here. Maybe they're just talking about loading up the milling machine, which they no longer need. And of course, you've got the low boy, you can't see behind the trees there, that they are in the process of loading up the mill. Okay, so this is all something that you would very likely see on a scene together. And yeah, depending on what the crew's doing, there may or may not be a mill in your paving scene. I get it. But, in this case, it was one of those mill and pave kind of in a day type things. Maybe he's just cleaning up the edges, whatever. It's realistic that they would be together. So it's very important that you set that scene up so that those pieces make sense. Now, let me take you over to something that doesn't make sense, and you're probably going to go, well, wait a minute, why doesn't it make sense? So let's go over here to the scrapper. I threw that front loader into my scrapyard, and you go, okay, well, that makes sense, right? Like we have an industrial scene, and we have a front loader. No, it doesn't make sense. Because there's not really any need in a scrapyard to have a bucket on a loader. Now, if that bucket had a claw or forks, that makes a lot of sense. In this case, this particular loader doesn't really make sense here. So it's not going to stay here because, well, it kind of ruins the scene. And I know maybe that's getting a little nitpicky. Maybe it's getting a little too much detail for some of you folks. But it doesn't, like that annoys me because it ruins the scene because it's like, okay, well, why do they have a front loader? Then you take that loader and you put it next to this 3D printed loader and you go, well, that's way different. Yeah, this is an actual 3D printed loader from somebody who knew what a front loader looked like. This was somebody trying something and it's not going to stay. So understand your industry, understand which vehicles might be in your industry, and as always, absolutely as always, go to the internet. You can find a picture of a scrapyard. You can find a picture of pretty much anything you want to model and do exactly what you see in that photograph. All buildings are built on some type of foundation, except sometimes when we model, and they're not. And that will absolutely ruin an otherwise good scene. So we got a couple things going on in this particular area that makes this scene a little bit unrealistic. Okay, first item, I got a floating building here. All right, the scenery stopped short. It's twofold. One, the building actually got bumped, and so it moved from where it was. But two, it's just not finished. Like, it's just not level. So there's two ways you can fix this. You can put a little bit of styrene and actually model a foundation, or you can bring this scenery up to match the foundation. Either way is correct, but something needs to be done because you cannot have a gap under your buildings. Okay, the next thing that is really, really important is making sure that your industry fits. And what I mean, okay, so you're not really going to have a loading dock situation where you can't get a truck by, right? Like that doesn't fit. And then even here, this guy's in the landscaping, so I don't know exactly how he's going to. Maybe he backed in here and he swung right into the dock, but he really can't maneuver. So this whole thing doesn't look correct because you wouldn't have this kind of a condition, and even this common carrier truck pulling out here, he's definitely not getting into this dock, and if he is, it's only into bay 1, right? Because he can maybe sort of do that, but yeah, he's not. It doesn't fit. So what we can do about this is a couple things. One, we can move the main line over, which is not ideal because it lines up with everything else and there's scenery involved. We do have the space to do it, so we could just bring this out and sort of loop it back around there. It's probably the right thing to do, maybe something that I end up doing. But the other thing we can do in the meantime is just not have a vehicle there. Because, yeah, we notice that it's tight, but it is the vehicle that gives us the scale that we go, ooh, that doesn't work. So figure out how you're going to place things on your layout. And don't be afraid to go, you know what, I don't have the space for that. I'm just going to skip it. And I know that may cost you something in your grand scheme, but when things are crammed in like this, it doesn't work. Like it's not how it would be in the real world, so it shouldn't be that way in our models. Now, if you are somebody who is space crunched, which I don't care how big or small your layout is, we're all space crunched because we all want to do more than we can. But if you have to do this, understand that there are certain ways that you can photograph it and video it and make it not look like you scrunched everything in. But that doesn't work when you're actually in person and seeing it. And then it's just like, you didn't really have enough space for that. So I see folks who are modeling steel mills, and I'm talking like actual steel mills, like they got the blast furnace and everything. And it shows me how many folks have never seen an actual steel mill to grasp the absolute enormity of these things. I happen to be able to see a steel mill almost every day, and it's huge. It's massive. There are tracks everywhere. There are trucks everywhere. Everything is dirty. It all looks gray. It is. But to actually see it, even from a distance, you get a respect for how big it is. So, I don't have the space or the run anywhere on my layout to actually model that realistically, which is why Rearton Steel on my layout doesn't have any actual steel type production facilities because I don't have the space to model it to make it look realistic. So choosing your industry will help bring out that realism a little bit too. Understand that, yeah, you might have space for a rolling mill, so you've got to work into your scheme as to how where that steel's coming from, because it doesn't really fit on your layout. And I guess if you are a purist, then this train probably upsets you all kinds of ways. Yep, that's right. Union Pacific Big Boy, Norfolk Southern. I think that's a 70. That's an 80 Mac, I think, following it. And this is my favorite right here. Yeah, Rexy laying on a flatbed. Probably gonna send you into fits. I actually had somebody took the time to write a comment that because of the dinosaur, it was so childish and they were never coming back to the channel. And I'll tell you what, my heart was all kind of broken up about that because somebody who I never met, had no opinion of, and couldn't care less about, didn't like Rexy. Well, I know you guys all like Rexy, and I like Rexy, and so that falls under it's just my railroad, and your opinion is less than nothing here. But that's one of those things where some folks do see that in the layout and they go, well, that just ruins it for me. And honestly, those people ruin the hobby more than anything. Because yes, we do strive for realism and we want our scenes to be real, but we also want them to be fun. And, if I was doing a real operating session, I probably wouldn't have Rexy in the train because although a T-Rex on my, seeing a T-Rex on my way to work on a flat car probably wouldn't be the weirdest thing I'd see all day, but, it's one of those things that, yeah, probably not likely. So for realism, 0 points, but for fun, it gets all the points. So something like that, you got to watch on your layout, know your audience, and they have to kind of know you a little bit, where something like that fits into your personality and fits into your silliness. And you don't let other people sway you. If that's what you like, then freaking go for it. If you don't, then yeah, maybe not put that in your operating session. So I can see where that will ruin a scene for a lot of folks, but for others, it'll just be something to talk about. And if the T-Rex sets them off, I'm sure some fishermen pulling up a shark off a pier, that is absolutely going to set them off. So be mindful of your scenery as well. Once again, who is your audience? Are you doing this for you, or are you doing this for someone else? If it's for you, put on whatever you want. If it's going to be, say, a club or something where other people's opinions might be involved, then something like this is a little bit different. And while I find all the humor in the world in this, some other folks may not. So this can kill the realism for some folks. And you'll notice even here with the Batmobile, I know that doesn't make a lot of scenes, right? Because it's not prototypical, but it's in a part of the layout where, yes, front and center, right in the front, but it's set away from the rest of the layout. So while all the action and the realism is happening up here, I've got some fun things down in the front. And yes, them being in the front is on purpose because that's where the kids' faces typically are. So when the little ones come over and they can see it, they get excited seeing the shark and the Batmobile and, of course, Rexy. Okay, so now we're going to get to do the fun part. This is where you watch some trains go by in scenes that I'm not paying attention to the camera, and I give you the poll results from the question that sort of started all of this online. So here's what I did. Went to the communities tab on the channel's page here on YouTube, and I posted this. I said, next week's video, which is what you're watching now, so it's this week's video, we're going to do a how to or how not to ruin a model scene. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. What is something you see in YouTube videos or on others' layouts that just ruins the scene for you? And of course, these choices were 4 options here, but you can leave comments and add something to it. Okay, so the first thing was out of era models. It's like a railroad Picasso in there. The other option was poorly detailed or incomplete scenes, looks toyish. Then we had messy scenery and stray material like a damn nader ripped through. Nader is tornado, in case you didn't know the lingo. And then the last one was just here to see who gets roasted so I can send them this link. And I'm sure somebody has gotten roasted and they're feeling butthurt in this video because they're like, oh, he's talking about my layout. I am not talking about anyone's layout other than my own, showing you what is here. So, okay, this poll was not up for very long. It was only up for 5 days, and usually I let them run for at least 2 weeks before I do it. So there's only 81 votes, which is kind of low, but around 40 votes lower than usual. So we'll call this an off-season election, I guess. But 30% of you, 81 there, said out of error models, and you don't like when models are out of error. Those folks are the people who are very particular about their layouts. They want to see everything error specific. They probably do the research. They're probably somewhat into the history side of things. And that is not the majority of modelers. If you fall in that category, it's not a bad thing, but you're going to be disappointed with most people's railroads because most people don't do that. They may have a little bit of the history and whatnot, but typically they just want to run trains. And since we're just running trains, I'm actually going to move you guys to another part of the layout. Okay, so the next group of you, poorly detailed or incomplete scenes, they look toyish. That was at 35%. And you know what? Trains randomly stopping, also toyish. And also, you know what? Short them out right there. Also not realistic. So probably not on your favorites list. Okay, 35% of you were in that category. Messy scenery, stray material, like a damn nader ripped through. Only 26%. And that percentage is actually really, 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 really low. And then 10% of you were just here to see who got roasted. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, because those results were actually pretty surprising to me. It tells you a little bit more about my viewership than it does about folks who may actually be, just hobby as a whole. And the reason I say that is because out of error models, 30% of you, and poorly detailed or incomplete scenes, that makes up 65%, the majority of folks. I will tell you the poorly detailed scenes, yes, those can really take away from the layout. So I understand that. The out of error models kind of struck me as odd because that's probably the last thing I look at from my standpoint, right? So it's just not something that is important to me. And as you guys know, that I collect whatever locomotive I see that I happen to like, and it's why I have so many locomotives. And to me, if I have two locomotives that they may not be era compatible, if they look cool together, I'm going to run them together. And that doesn't bother me. But it does apparently bother a good number of you. And that's fine. Just realize that when you're on YouTube and you're looking at others' channels, that probably isn't high on a lot of people's radar. Okay, the poorly detailed scene or incomplete scenes. You're looking at a poorly detailed and incomplete scene right now because we just started working on it. So understanding where somebody is in their model building is helpful, but it's also kind of one of those things where it's like, are you calling the scene done? Because if I was calling this scene done, you all would have a absolute right to say, dude, what the hell? Like, the scene's not done. How do you call that done? It doesn't even look right. Okay, legitimate. Very legitimate. And an absolute question that you should ask as to what I'm doing. Now, the one that I thought was going to be a lot higher and didn't score all that high. And I'm going to stop my Conrail here just because I've got my big boy coming around and I don't want him to collide, so we're going to stop him and wait for the big boy. But I thought that the messy scenery material was going to score a lot higher. The reason being is because that's a huge pet peeve of mine. I've already shown you some instances on my own layout where that is a problem. And once again, because I'm not considering any scene complete and I know I have to get back in there and I know I have to finish it and clean things up, I'm not terribly mad at myself. I mean, I'm mad at myself that I have to go back and do it, but it really detracts from a model when you see sloppy paint work, bad scenery, just incomplete work. It looks bad. And it really sticks out. So if you've got a model where there's plaster all over the foundation or sloppy paint work or bad joints at the corner of that you didn't fill with putty, or that to me sticks out real fast. And it shows me either one, the model was rushed, or two, it was built by somebody who was inexperienced. And now everyone who's inexperienced going, hey, well, I just started. No, I understand that. But it shows in your models where you are in your progression of the hobby. And so for those of you who are in that category, sorry about that. I bumped the camera and stopped it, but we just need to get you better. That's where I was going with that. We just need to get you caught up to everybody else. And I will tell you, there are still modelers who have been at it for a long time, and we still have that one kit that we absolutely struggle with. And even though we possess all the skills that we could possibly need, it just doesn't go together well, and it doesn't look like our best work. So it happens, it's not fun, but it happens. And just gotta own it and either fix it or replace it, but either way. All right, let's get our train going back here now that we're out of the loop together. And we're gonna get back on the road. Okay, so messy scenery, poorly detailed scenes. Let's go to your comments and talk about some of the things that you posted about that also upset you. Okay, one of the comments, and I absolutely enjoyed this comment, not because it was anything that was out of the ordinary, but it is something that also drives me nuts, and that is when you're doing grass. So when you're doing your scenery and you just lay down a grass mat instead of using like a static grass. Yes, that is absolutely a pet peeve of mine. We talked about how I do my basic scenery first with the fine flocking, and then I clean that all up with the static grass, and I add additional grasses to it to sort of bring it all home. And let me take you away from this running train here for just a second. I know that's what you came here for, but let me take you away from this train for just a second. I'm going to plop you right down here. You'll probably recognize this area from our last video with the switching. Well, 2 videos ago, I guess. But can you see now how it's a little bit different than the last time you saw it? Because the last time you saw it, it wasn't updated. So somewhere underneath all of that is the basic boring scenery. Let me take you around here, show you right there. Okay, boring basic scenery. But you can see where the static grass is sort of flopping back onto it, right? Okay, so we're building this up a little bit. Started working on some scenery. We're not going to get into everything I was doing there, but come right here. Look at that. Okay, so unwound stake. Yes, I agree with you. Static grass mats, not... Static grass mats are good. The sort of just regular, I'm going to roll out some of this toy stuff. Yeah, not so great. Now, Pondering Pops came and he said, that having a Berkshire pulling a string of hoppers, that's what upsets him. That goes back to the, sort of the realism and the purism of some of these railroads. And Pondering Pops, I'm afraid that at some point in time, I am probably going to upset you greatly in my video because I am going to be having the big boy do things that it shouldn't do. I've got a T1, a Reading T1, that is going to probably be in some of the switching videos that is going to be pushing some modern cars around. And, yep, it's probably going to drive you nuts, so I'm going to give you a fair warning. But so for some folks, that is a major deal breaker. And I get it. I mean, if you're spending all of your time going for professionalism and realism, then something like that is absolutely out of place and it doesn't look right. But if you are, I mean, even right now, look at this string of, you've got 2 YN3 locomotives bracketing a Chessie era locomotive. Now I know we could always go, well, heritage units, no, that they haven't done that. Like, that's not a real thing for this scheme. So even right now, this consist is out of place, right? So I'm sure somebody somewhere is set off. But, that's a real thing. And for somebody who has spent a lot of time researching and building their layout to a certain spec, certain era, certain, all the cars have to match, seeing somebody else's layout where they didn't do that probably irritates them because that's something that they enjoy in the hobby. For the rest of us, it just looks like a cool train. And I think this looks like a cool train. And I love the fact that I have a CSX locomotive bracketed by 2, or bracketing a chest that sits on. I don't know. Looks good. Looks cool to me. Okay. Now, Will brought up a great point in his, and I am absolutely guilty of this. And those we're going to use those 3 locomotives right there as an example again. He said weathered freight cars, which you are about to see, and because I've got my freight cars are weathered, and those 3 locomotives are brand new, shiny, out of the box. So I know I'm upsetting Will here a little bit, but it's not that I'm not going to weather my locomotives, because I absolutely am going to weather my locomotives. It's more that I haven't gotten to it yet, and I tend to do my locomotives last. They take a little bit more time, and I like to be a little more particular on them, and I can't just slap it on like I can with the cars. So I am guilty of that, absolutely, and I'm sure many of you are too. And I think there's some people who you even have a fear of, I've got a $300 locomotive or more, and I'm going to weather it, and I'm going to screw it up, and I'm going to ruin a $300 or more locomotive. I get that. However, folks, weathering is critical. If you want your scene to look real, if you want your layout to look real, you have to weather your stuff realistically. It's something that you should practice. It's something that you need to do if you want that realism. But once again, it's your railroad, and if you want everything to look shiny and new, that is your prerogative. However, yes, it will take away from the overall realism of your scene. And he also mentions where scenery's cobbled together, plaster on the structure, track, ground cover, when you use it's everywhere. Yes, that's one of my biggest pet peeves, and probably one of my biggest problems with the layout. So you would say, hey, well, you're being hypocritical. No, I'm recognizing that I have to fix some things, is what it is. And I absolutely have to fix some things. So I'm going to spend some time doing that here over the next couple of weeks, because getting the layout ready for the holidays and for guests and all that. So I will be working on that. You'll be seeing the scenes as they get updated in the videos. But yeah, that's a great complaint. That is something that is it stands out real fast on a layout. Okay, OBX Bill says wrong era vehicles get them. Yeah, that you know what, that's a problem. So he's talking about cars, trucks, those little details that we all like to add. Problem is, if you're modeling modern era, it's so common to not be able to have modern era vehicles. Now 3D printing has come a long way. Companies like Trainworks have really put out some nice vehicles, showcase miniatures. So there are options available for you in that market, but it is definitely a tough market for a lot of scales, because everybody thinks we're modeling sometime between the 1920s and the 1960s, and that's what they give us. Well, for those of us who are doing the modern stuff, 3D printing has come a long way in helping that out. So you just got to kind of look a little bit harder, and depending on your scale, it might be more difficult, but we are getting better in that. So we talk about out of era models, but how about out of location models? CSX and Coaster together? Yeah, that's not something that you would typically see, and it looks a little out of place. Once again, it falls into that category of, I'm sorry, I just kicked the tripod there. Comes into the, fitting out of, I like that model, and so there it is. The one comment, and it wasn't really a pro or con comment, was Nitro Star GT commented and said, hey, you know what? Remember, your opinion is just that, your opinion. And folks, I cannot stress that particular comment enough, because you will notice that every now and then we'll get a negative comment on the channel, and I'm usually very sarcastic towards it. And it's just because most of the comments are so inane. It's just like, wow, you actually took the time to write that comment. Guess you don't have much to do today. Now, I watch videos. Oh, we got a little separation there. I watch videos on the weekends during morning coffee when I'm not trying to process some old work emails and get caught up. Just like I'm trying to get this hopper car caught up here. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to catch up or not. There we go. But there's a lot of videos that I see where the quality of work that it's out there. It's not really all that great. Somebody's giving it their all. It's not there, and it doesn't require a comment. There's a lot of times when I'll see a channel that's not quite good, but it might be. Like, one day this channel might be something worthwhile, and so I'll follow it, and I'll watch the videos. I'll give them the little props. If there's something that they're working on that I think I can help, I'll give them something constructive. And honestly, our community here on YouTube for stuff like that is really, really good. But when it comes to these detail things, we all have to remember that it's not your railroad. It is being modeled by somebody who doesn't think like you, doesn't act like you, and probably doesn't want to run the same train that you want to run. So it's kind of funny that I'm doing this video here and we're talking about all these pet peeves, and one of my other pet peeves is making its face known here tonight. And as you've noticed, and I purposely haven't reshot the scenes because I wanted to talk about it, but so the car coming uncoupled. I had 2 shorts, one on the CSX and one on the Conrail. Part of that is because I haven't been down here running trains in about a week, and I've noticed that if I don't run trains at least once a week, they sort of get funky down here for some reason. I think it's just an accumulation of dirt on the track, but yeah, that is another thing that drives me nuts when I'm watching somebody's video. You notice the second when a locomotive rocks a little bit on some uneven track. You notice when a car comes up derailed or uncoupled, and it just immediately detracts from the scene, because in real life, a derailment is not an easy thing to put back on the track, and cars will rock, but they don't. It's just different when it's so small, because that rock doesn't look like, oh, it's just some bad track. It looks like, oh, this is not real. This is a model. So I left those in there just so you could see it, and probably set some of you off because it's like, oh my God, what's he doing? Yeah, just some rough track here. But okay, so let's close this thing out here and get back to what really annoys folks. So for those of you with the bigger layouts, you know that there's always going to be some scenes that aren't quite done, details not all the way there. And if you're like me, you don't necessarily model until the scene is complete. You model it until you basically get bored with it, and then you move on to the next scene. That's kind of my OCD kicking in, I guess. But I always come back to finish them, and it's just something that we have to do because, well, we have to finish our scenes at some point. And so when you come back around and you get to it, not a big deal. All of the scenes have a plan. Okay? So as long as you are following a channel, and that channel is telling you, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm working on, this is where I'm at, this is what's going on, you can pretty much understand where they're coming from, and what they do pretty much will start to make sense as to why they're prioritizing certain things. And if they have 2 late era CSX locomotives bracketing a chassis system, you may understand from that channel that, you know what, they're just a locomotive fan, and to them, it's just 3 SD40-2s, which they really, really like, pulling a coal train, which is very common for the layout that they're modeling. So understanding where that person's railroad is, understanding their skill set, will go a long way in describing why some of the scenes are the way they are. That doesn't excuse sloppy paint jobs. It doesn't excuse plaster on the building. That doesn't excuse an incomplete scene. It just kind of helps you get an idea of why some of those things might be the way they are. So where you have a scene where, yes, this is bare plaster, this is only basic scenery, and then right across the street is a fire hall with a ladder across the street, which would never ever happen, but the pin that holds that up, it clearly has fallen out, and it was left that way. So you kind of get the idea that even on a layout that is massive, somebody who's been doing it for 20 plus years, there is still stuff that needs done. So when you're watching somebody else's video, especially somebody who's just beginning, try to help them out when you can, because the things that upset you, maybe something that actually upsets them too, and they just don't know the best way to fix it. And by you trying to help them out, they can get that scene to the level that it should be, and you might make a friend along the way. And if you really, really, really like the dinosaur, put them on the flat card. It's your railroad.